Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. First and foremost, guys, I build these videos for like-minded folks just like you and I to try to help us all get to the finish line quicker but more proficiently. So to start this one off, guys, it's been a little while here since I've done a video. Actually started the habitat season, and as I'm saying that, I'm trying not to cough right now. We started the habitat season, did a couple of fly-in weeks, and somewhere along the line picked up flu, COVID, whatever. And it was pretty rough. And now getting to a point where I'm just trying to beat the little bit of the cough that I have left. So cough drops, some medication still pending. So I appreciate everybody reaching out this time of the year. It's always kind of humbling a little bit when folks reach out that haven't seen a video or wondering what happened and where I went. And I sure appreciate that, guys. It tells me that there's a lot of eyes on the channel and a lot of eyes on the business, and you're all here for the right reasons. And over the years have really built a great following and a lot of support around the country. They're always going to have the naysayers, right? But the folks that are here for the right reasons, I really appreciate each and every one of you. And like I said, I really do appreciate those messages, phone calls, and checking in to make sure everything was okay. Guys, today what we're going to do is we're going to dive right into this one. Excuse me. The screening and the habitat, screening versus habitat when we're talking about tree planting. The tree situation this time of the year, there's a lot of folks that have reached, have ordered, if I've designed the property, or, you reached out to a nursery, if you will, and local or national, and had a bunch of tree stock or bush habitat and stuff brought in, and you're wanting to get that stuff in the ground, and so you don't lose that good full growing season. A lot of moisture right now going into the spring, right? But on the other side, I see a lot of folks, setting themselves back so much just because it's this rush, and there's not what we all talk about, right? This planned attack. It's just throw these trees in, and if they're out there, that's better than not having them out there at all. And guys, it's a very, very strategic situation, and we're going to talk about that today. So access screening, guys, when we're talking about tree planting, a lot of times what I'm doing is I'm putting something that obviously doesn't have any food value to it at all. It's no different than planting an annual screen, Northwoods Whitetails, HD screening, Egyptian wheat, miscanthus, any of this stuff, reaching out to Brad Harper at Harper Growing Solutions and getting your miscanthus and putting this in. It's no different than that. It all goes back to not having a food source in that screening. If you're doing it for access screening, getting past those locations. Now, if you've got screening on a food plot, let's say, that's just breaking up a food plot, breaking up a shot plot from a food plot, then it can potentially have food in it because you're not walking past it, right? So something to keep in mind there, guys. Anytime you're talking about screening access, make sure there's first and foremost no food. Obviously, that's why I choose to use a lot of conifer. The stuff that we look for, guys, is spruce, some fir, depending on where you're at in the country, and pine, right? So there's a process of not just planting trees in certain areas. There's actually a rhyme and a reason for this. So today we're going to talk about this, guys. Access screening I like to do is multiple row, and it talks about this in my habitat book that my clients get. We're doing multiple rows. Let's just throw spruce out there right now. If you were to just put a single row, guys, a spruce tree grows from, narrow at the top, broad at the bottom, if you will, right? A lot of conifers do this. And what happens is you have these gaps, this pie-shaped gap that you're creating in the center of those. And I get to a lot of properties each and every year that have just planted the straight lines of these pines, and it's such a long-term screening to begin with. You wait years and years and years for that to happen, and all of a sudden it's got a bunch of holes in it, right? So really, what good is it? So remember this, guys, when you're planning this for access screening, I like to do these staggered rows. So 3 is probably my preferred line of defense, and in this pattern right here, guys. So when I get this all rowed on here, get my crayon working for me, I do, guys, is I like to plant these spruce. So what do you buy, right? How many do you buy? How big do you buy? I always tell folks this. It's kind of an old racing term. Speed costs money. How fast do you want to go? That's the way I treat the trees in general, including bush habitat plantings, guys. Buy the biggest tree that your pocket will allow you to buy. You're going to get there quicker. So if we're talking about spruce, let's just use blue spruce in this situation. We're going to plant these guys about 20 feet apart, and then we're going to set back 10 foot, so 20 foot between them, and then we're going to drop back 10 foot. And the reason for that is, guys, is when these mature, when these trees all mature, then, like we said, right narrow at the top, broad at the bottom, what happens is you obviously are filling that gap, right? This tree fills in this gap. And if you're driving past this, let's say, if you're screening this for a road frontage or something, you're driving past this, as these mature, it becomes a wall of screening. Is obviously you're looking to let these trees have enough room that they can breathe and really get good clean air, so you don't get the pine, especially spruce, guys, can be, not all the time, but they can be very buggy. So the closer you get them together, a lot of times what I find is you promote that disease within a tree or that bug within a tree. If you can get by them, or you can dust them and spray them, sometimes that's great. A lot of folks do that. I've done that with mine in the past. But it's just another expense, right? So sometimes it's best just to plant them at this 20 feet apart, drop back 10 foot, and then put the second row 10 foot behind the first one, and then you go back to the 20 foot apart on your third row. What that does, guys, is you'll find is that third row is usually when you get your really good volume of density years down the road, when everything finally matures. So keep that one in mind, guys. No food in multiple rows is the answer for screening when you're talking about access screening. So we're going to jump down to this one, guys. Soft edge for plot screening and stuff, like we talked. If we're going to stay on the conifer and the spruce topic here, guys, the soft edge part of it comes in when we're really trying to just make an edge from a big hardwood setting to a big beautiful food plot, and it's not just a direct line. It's not a very inviting situation at all. So sometimes what you can do, guys, is you can come down on the front here, and you can put these trees through here just as kind of a visual block. Now, I wouldn't recommend the access screening because it gets too dense in here, and also it creates a bunch of shade in the future. It could, depending on which way the sun is or which way this plot faces. But if this is on the south side, it's going to cast a bunch of, when these are mature, it's going to cast a bunch of shade out here in your food plots, guys. So don't do double and triple rows of them. Maybe I will just plant these every 20 feet, something like this, right? So as they mature, yeah, it's possibly a wind block. It's got a bunch of aesthetic value to it. I've got a gentleman that's done a bunch of this in Wisconsin, one of my properties that I've done, designed, and man, just a beautiful, beautiful look on the edge of these, these northern properties up there. And a lot of times what you'll find, guys, is because of the wind block of these and everything, you'll find a bunch of these beds, bedding right behind it. And what it does is it just makes this whole bedding area slide up a little bit closer, so we're utilizing everything we're building. And again, it creates a little soft edge, much like what we'd be doing as when we're creating a higher hinge maybe, and creating a soft edge on the edge of a field just to break up that sight line. Same theory. So not the biggest point here, guys, is to remember, don't just choke this off for multiple reasons, for shade and blockage. Maybe a single row and not so much the multiple row of defense here, because you're not walking past the situation between here. Now, if you're looking to access past this food plot, then you go back to this double or triple row planning right here. If your access was through here, let's say, get the blue marker and we drew a line here, and you've got to access past this food plot, then up here is where we go back into this double or triple row of planning, right? This higher line of defense up here. To get our footpath past it, but not on the doe bedding side. Don't overdo it. We're just looking to create more of a soft edge. If we jump over here, guys, to here, this is probably my favorite thing to do when we're talking about bedding and tree planting, conifers, thermal, building bedding, if you will. Guys, this here is a big piece of what I do on a lot of properties. Over the years, there's some tricks that we've learned. This was actually brought to me by a client of mine that had researched this. I found it somewhere and started using it. And over time, I've probably seen a couple dozen properties that have now done this through my teaching and stuff that I've tripped on that other folks have been taught to do this. And boy, it really, really, really works out great. So now we're talking about bedding, guys. We're talking about taking these conifers, right, and putting them internal bedding areas. You can't have the volume that we need for screening in here, because it will choke off way too much of your regeneration and your food value in here. So don't overdo these conifers, guys, in these bedding areas. I always tell folks this, is if you have a bedding area, excuse me, if you have a bedding area that you're building and it's got a bunch of pine or conifer or red cedar, let's say, here in Kentucky, here on the farm, don't take them all out, because if you take them all out, you're going to have to put them back in, right? So I'd be removing the largest ones in those bedding areas and leaving the good younger ones that you're going to get a lot of value out of for years to come. So is that cedar? Is that spruce? It could be both, or it could be one or the other. One of the things that I'll show you guys here is this dice pattern is such a great tool, a great way to do this. Because whichever way the wind is blowing, our goal is to try to keep those does or keep the deer in certain areas for predictability reasons and huntability reasons of the property. And if you set everything up for like a predominant wind that we're going to talk about, we've talked about it multiple times, folks go in and just set a farm up for predominant winds, right? Well, what happens when the wind isn't? Building bedding areas only on south-facing slopes gets folks into a lot of trouble. Because what happens when it's a north wind, or a south wind, and what if when it's a cold and it's on that, south-facing slope, and what if there's no thermal protection? They're going to go somewhere else to find it, right? So why not offer it all on a property? Why not have some here, some there, some for north wind, some for south wind, and protect them so when it happens, they can stay in the same location, just move throughout that bedding area or that creation. And you don't lose everything to your neighbors until maybe a week later when the weather is right for your property. You want to have a very inviting blended situation. So this dice pattern, guys, no matter where the wind is blowing, the theory is, right, they always have something as far as thermal protection. Now, in these bedding areas, you're always going to have debris. You're going to have some hinge cuts. You're going to have stuff like that. Excuse me, guys, that always aid to that wind block, maybe some switchgrass out here on the edge, maybe some soft edge planting, stuff like that. That's going to help that soft edge is going to help that thermal protection. But offering that really helps them, like I said, stay consistent and want to be able to use that bedding area more often. One thing to keep in mind here, guys, that I've found over the years when we're talking about this tree planting internal of habitat creations, as far as bedding, is to not just plant these willy-nilly out here in the wide open. I can't tell you how many times that I learned the School of Hard Knocks. I'm a graduate of this years ago, you know, going into these areas and planting these because there's nothing around them. And the thought process is, boy, I'm going to plant it here. There's nothing here, and it has a big area to grow in. Problem with that is, guys, that old rule of thumb, if you want 5 spruce trees to grow, plant 10, because they're going to kill 5 of them. And that's why they end up killing them, is because they're right out in the wide open. If they don't nip the tops of them off or eat them in the winter, then they'll rub them when they do finally get mature, and then it's all for none, right? So you want to hide these guys, and where I hide them, and this illustration right here that I have, is in the tops of debris or in the tops of your hinge cut. You know, that top is laying down. It's a perfect time. It's a seclusion cage, right? We all do that with our food plots to keep the deer out of there, to see exactly the height and the tonnage that we're growing in our food plots. And that's exactly what I use those for in a bedding area, is those tops are a seclusion. They can't get to them, right? So it lets them mature, and they're able to, maybe in the future we have to cut a limb or something out around them to really let them expose their full potential, but usually by then they're off and running and they're pretty hard to kill, right? So that's that is a great tip, guys. The other thing that I found to finish this off inside of these bedding areas, I've researched this for years. I've done a bunch of this myself. I've been on client properties. You know, I've been on some beautiful bedding areas that folks have taken time, hours and hours and hours, put bedding blocks in there, you know, put certain things for canopy, and it all works. Sometimes I find, guys, that it's just, there's better things that we could be doing besides putting bedding blocks in there, or taking a leaf blower and cleaning out a spot for that buck or that deer to bed right here. If you have time, I'm not going to say they're not going to use that. It's like a bench, right? My bench that you see that I do sometimes on properties. It's not that they, you know, need it, but it's great when you have a chance to build it. And like a bench, it's easy for us to maintain. And that's kind of like internal of a bedding, guys. You can spend hours and hours and hours and really be creative. And I encourage you to do so if you have time. But let's get it built first, right? Let's get it in motion. And then let's go back and you know, see what we can better that situation throughout you know, over the years. But one of the things that I find, guys, on that topic that a lot of folks are doing is this, is you take this dice pattern and you have these trees. And what I like to do is you go in here, guys, and you cut all these limbs off, let's say about 4 foot up, and you cut these limbs off on one of these trees on the north side. And then the other one, you go over here and you trim these off on the south side. And then the next one, you might go up here and you might trim these ones off here, and on the east side or the west side, right? A little bit of everything in there. And what that does, guys, is it makes these other limbs on the lower side, you'll find that they just blow up, get real dense. Excuse me, and they get real full, close to the ground, and it leaves this pocket right in here, and they'll always bed in here. It's got a little canopy for them, you know, and boy, what a neat little deal, right? So they can bed up closer to it. Do you need to do that? Absolutely not. But like I said, if you have time and once them mature and they get to that stage, you can go in and do these. The other thing that I've done, guys, is you go in, if you are using, so the pine-wise, you can use some white pine. I'm not a fan of using red pine for habitat at all, because it gets so tall and there's no lower limbs, and it doesn't have a lot of thermal protection, and they're very brittle. But white pine, guys, it's brittle as well, but it's a you know, a very durable tree, let's say, and it has its place. So maybe you do some spruce and you do some white pine in here, so you have some high and low. You just don't want to do a lot. The white pine are like a maple tree, right, guys? They get so big topped, and they can start killing off so much habitat because of shade. So watch what you're doing. It's not that you can't, if you put a bunch in, it's not that you can't trim them out in the future. You just have to watch and catch that quick enough so you don't not catch it in that first couple of year window and really start shading out certain areas. So if you're using white pine, and you can do this with the spruce as well, guys, I like to come in here, and what we'll do is we'll top these trees about 6 or 8 foot, 6, 8 foot in the air. And what happens is it puts all the energy out here, and this tree just gets real thick lower. It grows out, right? It's growing this way and not up. And what you'll find all of a sudden, guys, is you have a little bit of canopy in here in this bedding, but you don't have canopy like you would in a multiple canopy or a double story situation of hardwoods in these bedding areas where we're trying to get this light to the forest floor, because you don't have too many of them in there that would ever allow that to happen. But what you're doing is you're able to put the growth out horizontally, not so much in the air. We don't need the height, right? They don't need the height. And guys, like I said, going back on this, a lot of this is just a cosmetic, value that you can add. You don't have to do these things. Deer bed in a lot of these areas, especially up north, 6, 8 inches of snow on them, and they just hunker down, and they don't need a lot of this from above. What they need is that protection from the side. They need that thermal protection breaking up that wind. So when it's 0 or sub-zero temperatures and you add a 20-mile-an-hour wind to it, now you're talking about teens and 20 belows, and that's where frostbite and all that wind really is a harm, right? So does it add some shade in the summer by doing some of this stuff? Yep. Will they enjoy it? Yep. Does a little bit of canopy, as far as a hinge cut canopy, is it okay? Yep. Do you want all of it canopied? No. So use your use your head when it comes to this stuff, guys. But the downside of tree planting, whether it's for screening and or habitat, guys, when we're talking about conifers, is it's a long process. So like I said, be patient with it. Get it started just as quick as you possibly can. After your tree work, your hardwood stock and stuff, your hardwood tree stock work is done, because you don't want to smash this stuff. So don't go in there, plant a bunch of this stuff. Then you've got logging or a bunch of FSI to do in this area over the next year, and you're going to crush it, right? It's all for none at that point. It's a process. It's probably second or third thing to do down the chain after these bedding areas are created. Then we can go in and start adding this. But the quicker you get it in, quicker you're going to see the response of this stuff, guys, because like we said, it takes a long time to get it there. I hope these ones help, guys. Just remember, when you're talking about screening, anything screening, if it's got something to do with your access past a food plot or your access, your foot travel past these areas, guys, just remember, you really want to make sure that we are not putting food in these areas. So one thing I'll touch on, guys, here that I should have touched on before, one of the biggest things up here on access screening, when we're talking about, a lot of times you'll find folks are doing a lot of different conifer. Let's say we use some white pine and we're going to use some spruce. So let's say we use some white pine to the outside because we need some taller height from a road or something, and then we go in and we're going to use some spruce. One thing to watch, guys, is this. Always look down the road, right? When these mature, what is your sun going to do to those areas, to those shorter trees, right? So something to keep in mind. I see I get to a lot of properties sometimes, guys, when the screening and it's planted, and all of a sudden these trees your spruce aren't growing, and they're full of bugs, and then your outside taller trees aren't growing, and it just becomes this stagnant. It's like, what happened? And the reason is this tree here is either blocking the sun from these little guys to these little guys, and they're not growing, or these ones are blocking the sun to this big tree, and those aren't growing, right? So I kind of like my screening to be honest with you. I like doing more of a all the same for that reason. So maybe what I'll do, guys, is I'll do conifer, let's say, right to the edge. I'll do some switchgrass, and then I'll do some conifer again or something like that. A line of defense, right? Multiple line of defense.